Chapter 401, Banner's Change. Huh? Banner, don't you hate turning into the Hulk? Noah asked, surprised when Banner suddenly said he wanted to transform. Banner had always struggled with the Hulk, didn't he? Even in the original story, Bruce had only accepted the Hulk after a long, painful process. Had something happened to him that Noah didn't know about? Banner smiled. I just want to make a change. The reason for Banner's change had everything to do with Betty. In the original timeline, Bruce and Betty hadn't stayed together. Although their feelings were deep, Bruce had eventually pushed her away, afraid he couldn't control the Hulk and would hurt her. After he was taken by S.Shield, he cut off contact. The movies never explained why. Maybe Betty had married. Now, because of Noah's interference, Bruce didn't break things off. He and Betty resumed their relationship. They couldn't see each other often, but they spoke on the phone or by video every day, and their feelings remained strong. Betty's view of the Hulk was different from everyone else's. She always insisted the Hulk was still Bruce, that the Green Rage was part of him, not a separate alien entity. She said it so often that Bruce slowly began to accept it. When he went back to his old university to look for research notes, he found himself surrounded by General Ross's men. That was when Betty saw him turn into the Hulk for the second time, and the Hulk protected her from an explosion. The first time Betty had seen the Hulk had been during an experiment gone wrong. He'd been a rampaging, irrational monster. Betty was knocked unconscious in the chaos, and Bruce had fled afterwards. In their second meeting, though, she sensed something different. The Hulk seemed to recognize her and deliberately protected her. That shift convinced Betty the Hulk was Bruce, and that belief changed Bruce in turn. Under Betty's gentle insistence, he started trying to accept the Hulk. He practiced approaching that part of himself instead of rejecting it. Now he could transform by choice, rather than only when his emotions broke through. Ever since I saw those aliens invade, I keep wondering what would happen if it happened again, Bruce said. How many people would die? If I have the power to do something, I should step up. He remembered the day after the Chitauri invasion ended, when Betty had called to check on him, and then said something that stuck with him. She thought she'd see him on the battlefield one day. She wasn't being sarcastic, and Bruce didn't actually expect her to fight, but the idea bothered him. What if the Hulk had been there back then? Would fewer people have been hurt? That thought pushed him to stop hating the Hulk and try to make it an ally. Tony clapped a hand on Bruce's shoulder, grinning. Oh, Banner, finally willing to turn. Last time I missed the big guy. Bit of a pity. Noah nodded slowly. If Bruce reconciled with the Hulk, it would be good for their side. Another tremendous combat asset. Come on, Banner. Let the Hulk out. Let me see him, Tony whispered, arm still around Bruce. No, Tony, that's too dangerous. This is a lab. There are no enemies here. I'm not going to let the Hulk loose and risk wrecking everything. Bruce pushed Tony back, firm. Noah, the data's ready. Lyssandra's clear, cold voice cut through their banter. Noah turned to face her and saw graphs and points arrayed across the screen in front of her. When Noah had decided to let most of the deviants gather, only intervening with those that headed through human settlements, Lysandra immediately began calculating their trajectories. Lyssandra's processing power exceeded any other computer on Earth. In a short time, she ran countless simulations and quickly flagged the deviants that needed to be prioritized. These particular deviants weren't smart, even if Crow had ordered a coordinated approach. Move to this location, avoid humans, do not engage. They would likely only follow the first instruction and misunderstand or ignore the rest. That made them dangerous. Lysandra placed them on the elimination list. They might never get another chance to follow Crow again. Noah studied the red dots Lysandra had marked. They weren't presently heading towards cities or villages, but Lysandra's analysis suggested their paths would intersect with human habitats later. This data is not static, Lysandra said. I will continuously update their projected routes based on behavioral changes. This one looks like it's already approaching human habitation, Noah said, hands folded as he stared at the magnified scan on the screen. Banner and Tony joined him. Noah had just finished explaining the data Lysandra had calculated. They all looked at the same map, Australia. The continent teemed with wildlife, and the deviant readings were denser there than anywhere else. A cluster of red dots moved across the display. Deviants that had apparently awoken in a desert and, after taking orders from their leader, were charging without pause toward Alaska, straight across the Pacific. Noah frowned. He wondered if any of them might drown crossing the ocean, but deviants had shown a frightening capacity to evolve on the fly. Even non-swimmers could very quickly adapt or develop aquatic abilities mid-transit. These particular deviants were different, too, single-minded, not veering for uninhabited regions like the others. They were heading straight for the city. "They're fast," Tony said. "We need to move." "Noah, start with these," Tony added, glancing at the screen. 1, 2, 3. Perfect, one for each of us. "No need to trouble the lady with this," Tony said with a grin. "The three of us can handle it." "Tony, I'm not ready yet," Banner muttered, a little baffled that Tony had dragged him into it. He had made a decision recently, but he hadn't expected to suit up on the spot. "No, Banner, you are ready. A man can't say I can't at the first problem," Tony said, clapping him on the shoulder. Noah checked the distance between the deviants and the city, then looked back at Tony. "Time's tight. I'll open a teleportation gate and send you there." He raised a hand and summoned a human-sized blue gate. Tony hesitated only long enough to laugh nervously. "Wait, send me back so I can put on my suit. You don't want me charging in bare-handed." "No, this goes to your tower. Get in," Noah said, gesturing impatiently. Tony darted through the gate and vanished. On the top floor of Avengers Tower, Pepper had just finished a day's work and was relaxing with a cup of coffee when a familiar blue gate opened out of nowhere beside her. She had stepped through one like it twice before, so she wasn't as startled as the appearance warranted. Before she could approach, Tony burst through the gate and nearly ran into her. "Tony?" She blinked. "Oh, Pepper, you're still here. I just popped back for something," Tony panted, already moving toward the balcony. "Jarvis, prepare the Mark 17. "Yes, sir," Jarvis replied. He couldn't accompany Tony into Noah's lab because of Lissandra's restrictions, but once Tony was back on the tower, his systems were fully available. Mechanical arms lifted from the floor and a new Mark Series suit rose on a frame. Tony had renovated the top floor to include a full suit-up facility, mechanisms that made donning armor fast and convenient. He slipped off his shoes, stepped onto the platform, and let the suit envelop him. The Mark 17, codenamed Heartbreaker, locked around him. Heartbreaker was heavy-duty work, red, gold, and silver, with a more substantial build than most of his other marks. 4 strap-like structures crossed the chest in an X pattern, forming a reinforced chest guard. The large vibranium chest repulsor could unleash tremendous power. The armor's shell was built from titanium with vibranium components, giving it high output and extreme durability. Though the suit wasn't a full vibranium construct, Tony still couldn't justify the cost or availability. The vibranium in Heartbreaker came from a previous deal with Noah, enough to boost performance where it counted. Tony flexed a gauntleted fist and felt the power. The suit's weight thudded on the floor as the integrated servos settled. "All right, time to show those deviant freaks what my iron fist feels like," he said, grinning. "Pepper, I'm headed out," he called, already moving back to the gate. "Keep relaxing." "Wait, Tony," Pepper began, but Tony was gone. The gate shimmered closed behind him. Chapter 403, Hot Desert. In the underground laboratory on the island, Noah and Bruce Banner waited for Tony to return, while Lysandra continued to monitor and analyze the deviant's activity. Banner had his eyes closed, mentally bracing himself for whatever fight might come. Noah watched the destination feed for the upcoming teleport, the desert. Thump, thump, thump. Metal struck the floor. When Noah and Banner glanced at the teleporter, Tony stepped through wearing a brand new suit of iron. It was clearly a heavier, more heavily armored model than his previous designs. "Tony, is that your new suit? It looks good," Noah said, sizing it up. Tony caught the compliment and subtly shrugged. Noah pinched his fingers together and sealed the teleport gate behind him. "Of course, spent a lot of time on this one. Mark 17. I call it Heartbreaker," Tony said, pounding his chest plate with a dull clang. "Ready to go? I can't wait." "No rush," Noah replied, turning back to the map display. He'd already memorized the desert's terrain. He could open another gate and go any time. Bruce hesitated. "I'm ready too, Noah, But if the Hulk comes out and I don't change back, don't let him take off. Keep him from going off on his own." Noah nodded. He'd stopped a rampaging Hulk once before. He wasn't worried. "All right, let's move." Noah acknowledged Lysandra and pulled up the image of the desert on his system, then opened a teleportation gate big enough for 3 people. He stepped through first. "Banner, let's go." Tony followed at once. Banner rubbed his hands and climbed through behind them, muttering, "Hope nothing goes wrong today." When they stepped out, the heat hit them like a wall. Even though it was morning, the sun had already pushed the temperature up toward 40 degrees Celsius. Sweat beaded on Banner's forehead before he had taken 3 steps. They stood atop a sand dune with a wide, searing view of the desert below, a rolling sea of sand that shimmered and warped in the heat. A moving dust cloud caught Banner's attention, a small sandstorm of sorts, but not entirely natural. The swirl of sand was stirred up by movement. Banner guessed the deviants were hiding inside it. Tony initially froze in place. Banner wondered what he was doing until Tony wobbled and grinned. Phew, much better with the AC on. When Tony first emerged, the suit's environmental controls had hiccuped. Tony's suits always account for extreme conditions, but he also liked to test new systems in live conditions. The air conditioning reported a fault the moment he stepped into the desert. Heat rushed into the suit and made him miserable. A few curses later, he hammered at the control panel and, with Jarvis's help, patched the malfunction. If he hadn't, he figured he'd have had to pull out. Noah, meanwhile, wasn't staring at the dust storm. He was looking at something only he could see, his system panel overlay. After scanning the deviants in the dust, information invisible to his companions, he opened his mission panel. His current mission wasn't finished, and he wanted to see whether new tasks would spawn from the deviant activity. The unfinished missions still sat at the top of the panel. Near the bottom was the recent entry he'd noticed earlier, B-rank mission Deviant Remnants. Noah hit refresh and watched the system generate new assignments. B-rank mission, Eliminate Deviants. C-rank mission, Afforestation. "There actually are some," Noah said, his eyes lighting up. He skimmed the 2 odd C-rank jobs and zeroed in on the B-rank mission. Chapter 404. Tony and Banner's first battle against the Deviants. B-rank mission, Eliminate the Deviants. Background. Almost all Deviants, at the call of their leader, are converging on the leader's location. During this movement, some lower intelligence Deviants are attempting to pass through human settlements. Eliminate them before they reach the cities. Mission objective. Deviants from invading human cities. This mission will be completed after finishing the Deviant Remnants mission. Noah read the mission prompt and frowned. Oh, is it related to the previous mission? He wondered. The notice ruined his idea of slowly grinding missions by picking off stray deviants, but when he saw Tony and Banner arrive, he accepted the job and looked to them. "Noah, what now? Do we go in?" Tony asked, easing Banner to his side. The loose desert sand made movement difficult. Tony's heavy suit sank with every step. "Let's go in. There are only 3 deviants, perfect for 1 each," Noah said, eyeing a dust cloud in the distance. 3? Tony started to ask how Noah knew, but Noah was already moving. He lifted his right hand and swung decisively toward the dust. A sharp wind blasted from his palm, not stirring the whole dune into a sandstorm, but slicing precisely toward the target. Noah's control was exact. He had learned to channel his wind technique in tight bursts that carried power without collateral chaos. The gust cut through the dust and revealed the deviants. Under the wind's strike, they halted and adopted wary stances, eyes snapping toward the hill. From the top of the dune, the 3 figures finally had a clear view. The deviants resembled giant bearded dragons, only horribly exaggerated. Their tails stretched roughly 8 meters long. When they crouched on all 4s, their shoulder height was nearly 3 meters. 4 of those 8 meters came from tail elevation, but even accounting for that, they were massive. Their skin was covered in purplish-black scales, and beneath their throats a fringe of long, keratinous spikes fanned out like a mane, the trait that gave bearded dragons their name. On these deviants, the mane looked aggressive rather than ornamental. Thick, fleshy tendrils dangled from the exposed purple muscle areas between scales, adding to their menacing look. The three reptilians had black slit pupils that tracked Noah, Tony, and Banner on the dune. Long tongues flicked from between sharp fangs, tasting the air. "So they're big lizards," Tony said. Jarvis adjusted the optics on Tony's faceplate to give him a clearer image. Banner, farther away, couldn't see details, but could make out their bulk. Noah, of course, saw them plainly. Compared to the tentacled, poisonous lizard he'd encountered earlier in the Amazon, these were less grotesque, no dense masses of tentacles, but still far from tame. "They're coming. Banner, get ready," Tony warned as the three deviants completed a quick scent check and lunged for the dune. "I'm going first." Tony crouched, and the repulsors in his palms and boots flared. With a roar, his suit rocketed him into the air. Then he angled down. "Hey, little crawlers, come to Daddy!" Tony called and fired a palm cannon. A brilliant laser streaked across the sky and struck cleanly, hitting one of the bearded dragon deviants square on. Scales blackened, and smoke hissed off the wound. The struck reptile roared, planted a massive paw to brace, and halted its charge. The blow hadn't finished the creature, but Tony had done what he intended. He'd drawn aggro. The other two kept charging up the dune. Noah glanced at the oncoming pair and then at Banner. "Banner, you ready?" "Oh, okay, almost ready," Banner said, drawing a long breath. He reached inward and, for the first time in this tone, called out to the other presence in his mind. It was more than anger or resentment this time. He let loose the suppressed instinct. "Hulk, Hulk!" Banner's inner plea was raw and open, and unlike before, it did not try to hide or negotiate. Something in Banner answered. The green began to creep over his skin, muscles swelling painfully as his clothes tore. His shirt shredded across the chest. Only a pair of tight shorts remained. Hulk emerged with a roar, a sound that seemed to expel months of being locked inside. The two deviants screeched and stopped short. The small creature that had earlier smelled like food had suddenly become something dangerous and unpredictable. Tony banked in the air, eyes narrowing as his HUD tracked muscle mass and threat level. "Good timing," he muttered, already recalculating angles. Noah steadied himself, wand bristling at his fingertips, ready to shape the air into barriers or whips as needed. Jarvis fed Tony trajectory predictions and tactical overlays through the suit. Hulk stamped forward, every stride making the dune shudder. The nearer deviant hissed and lashed its tail, spikes bristling, while the other circled, searching for an opening. The desert sun gleamed off its purple-black scales, and their long tongues flicked with fresh curiosity and newfound caution. The first real collision was about to happen, three skilled fighters against three massive aberrations, but the advantage had shifted. Tony had one pinned, Hulk occupied two, and Noah's winds could keep control over the battlefield. The deviants, used to scattering prey, now faced coordinated opposition. "Let's finish them before they change their minds about this buffet," Tony said, voice flat with focus as he dove toward the struggling charred deviant. Noah's winds tightened, slicing the air into narrow lanes, while Hulk bellowed and prepared to strike. The desert filled with the sound of combat, metallic whine, ripping fabric, reptilian roars, and the crack of wind, marking the first coordinated fight these three would share against the deviants. Chapter 405, Hulk's Battle. Roar! Hulk! On top of the sand dune, Banner's body began to convulse and expand, inflating into a colossal green form. A violent force burst out of him, tearing through every restraint. The Hulk was finally free. He spread his arms, threw his head back, and unleashed a thunderous, furious bellow that rolled across the desert and shook the surrounding dunes. Fine grains of sand slid down under the vibration, pouring off the slope in an avalanche of dust and grit. When the roar subsided, the Hulk gasped, eyes wild, fists clenched, muscles twitching. He scanned his surroundings and locked onto a figure nearby. "Hulk, long time no see. Don't look over here. Your enemies are down there," Noah called calmly, unruffled by the Hulk's murderous glare. An ordinary person would have been frozen in terror under that stare, but Noah simply pointed down the dune toward two aberrant race lizards that had halted in their tracks, wary and alert. The sound of Noah's voice steadied something inside the Hulk. Whether it was the memory of being shocked when Noah first met Betty and Banner, or the time Noah had strapped little glowing things on him to make monster smashing more entertaining in the forest, Banner's fragment of thought recognized Noah as a friend. The Hulk turned his attention to the two aberrant race lizards partway down the slope. Enemies! Hulk smash, he growled. With a powerful push from his legs and a running start, he leaped toward the deviants. The aberrant race lizards hissed in alarm as the green giant descended. One opened its jaws in a threat, trying to intimidate the intruder with a terrifying rasp, but the Hulk was not to be cowed. He fell like a hammer, his massive fist slamming into the head of the nearest lizard. Boom! His hard knuckles met the lizard's armored skull with overwhelming force. The impact drove the creature's head into the sand. Its body and long tail flipped up, sand exploding outward. Without pausing, the Hulk rode the momentum and lunged at the second lizard. That one had recovered faster. It charged with surprising speed, four powerful limbs driving it forward, jaws gaping and fangs flashing in the sun. The Hulk shifted his strike, trading a punch for an open-handed grab, and shoved his palms straight into the beast's maw, trying to wedge it open. At this close range, the lizard's teeth were razor-sharp. Hulk's thick palms were cut as he pried the jaws apart. Green blood oozed from the wounds. If even heavy machine gun fire couldn't pierce Hulk's hide, those teeth had to be truly vicious. The pain only enraged him further. Anger fed his strength, and he grew a little taller still, his torso swelling until he stood about 2.5 meters high. He braced and forced the lizard's mouth wider, preparing to crush the skull within. Suddenly, the lizard twisted. Its long tail, hard as a steel whip, swung in a blinding arc and struck the Hulk squarely. The blow knocked him off balance. He was hurled through the air like a skipping stone skimming across water, slamming into the desert again and again. Clouds of sand erupted with every impact. Freed, the lizard snapped its jaws closed once, then roared and hissed in fury. Spines along its chin and throat flared like a ruff, making its head look even larger. It surged toward the Hulk even as he was still tumbling. The first lizard, the one whose head had been driven into the sand, had just managed to pull itself clear and looked around, dazed. It saw its companion charging and instinctively tried to follow. Whoosh! A gust of sand blasted across its path, scouring its vision. When the sand settled, a deep gully yawned where the lizard had been running. The pit was more than 10 meters deep. The shifting sand at the edges continued to slough away, trying to fill it in. The ground beneath the lizard's feet sagged. It skidded to a halt and pulled back, wary of falling in. Little lizard, your opponent is me. Don't wander into other people's fights. Noah descended slowly and casually floated down a short distance in front of the stranded aberrant race lizard, his tone amused and his posture unconcerned. Chapter 4-6, Thor's Substitute, Tony's Fight. Noah had planned it from the start, 3 deviants, one for each of them. Hulk and Tony had already engaged theirs, leaving the third to face Noah. These deviants were not to be underestimated. Noah estimated that any one of the 3 in front of them could take on as many as 50 of the leader's mutated creatures. Those mutants carried Hulk's blood and were ferocious, but deviants were celestial creations. Their raw power was on a different level. Still, for Noah, dealing with a single deviant was hardly a challenge. The aberrant race lizard that had been sent after Noah hesitated when a small figure suddenly dropped before it. The unexpected descent made it wary. Scent and memory told it this creature was the same as the long-familiar easy prey. It opened its massive jaws and let out a roar. Smack! The roar was cut off as a huge palm of condensed blue magic slapped it back into the sand dune. Your breath stinks, buddy. Keep your mouth shut, Noah muttered as the blue power around his hand faded. Noah didn't dwell on the deviant. His attention was on Hulk and Tony. He trusted Hulk's strength, but he wasn't sure how Tony's suit would fare. The lizard Noah had slapped out of the sand fought to break free, and when it did, Noah smiled and exhaled a puff of white smoke. Another Noah appeared on the sand. The new Noah glowed with brilliant purple light, spinning faster and faster until he reshaped into a heavy-set blonde warrior in gleaming armor, hammer raised. Yellow lightning crackled around him. Thor, Prince of Asgard, stood there in all his heroic grandeur. Cloning and transformation, the combined gifts of Nico, the curious chameleon, and her shapesplitter skill. With them, Noah could make clones and have those clones take on the forms of others, provided Noah had met the person and taken a trace of their soul aura, their shoma. Without that trace, the imitation could never be perfect, and the clone wouldn't be able to replicate the person's true abilities. "Little lizard, bite the dust," the Thor clone bellowed and charged, hammer raised. Yellow lightning, different from Thor's usual blue, flickered and arced across his armor, striking pits into the sand as he advanced. The color difference came from Noah's equipment. The electrocution blade in his gear slot converted the energy into yellow lightning when projected through the clone. Noah controlled the clone with his own will. He'd practiced splitting his mind across multiple bodies ever since he learned Shape Splitter, sometimes managing 3, 4, or more simultaneously. After acquiring the Mind Stone, that became far easier. Its power let him command half a dozen clones at once without strain. Still, Nico's gift came from hero fragments and was incomplete, so Noah kept training to expand the skill. While the Thor clone set about beating the sand into submission, Noah switched his focus to Tony. Tony had intercepted an aberrant race lizard right off the bat, slamming palm repulsors into its flank. The repulsor didn't shred the creature, it left a blackened mark on its scales, but it did enrage the lizard. The beast pivoted, full of fury, and turned toward Tony, exactly what Tony had expected. "Hey, Crawler, how about you try this next?" Tony said, keeping his distance. Confident in his suit's defenses, he refused to slug it out on the ground against such a massive opponent. Flight was his advantage, and he wasn't about to give it up. Jarvis had already swapped the missiles in every launcher for armor-piercing rounds, the sort used to punch through heavy tank armor. Tony was sure that, no matter how thick the scales, those rounds would find a way through. Plates on the Mark 17 slid apart, shoulder, thigh, waist armor shifting to reveal missile ports. High-velocity armor-piercing rounds launched down at the aberrant race lizard. Their speed was lethal, but in exchange, they had lost the missile system's usual tracking precision. The lizard's pupils constricted as it sensed the incoming threat. It twisted its massive bulk, trying to dodge. Many of the rounds skipped past, slamming into sand and burying themselves meters below. Still, the creature was huge, and several rounds found purchase, piercing scales and driving deep into flesh. These weren't ordinary AP rounds. They were high-explosive armor-piercing shells designed to detonate after penetration. Boom, boom, boom! The explosions erupted from inside the beast, tearing through its innards. A primeval roar answered the detonations as the creature writhed in agony. Chapter 407. Suddenly, Tony was defeated. Armor-piercing rounds are munitions specifically designed to puncture armored targets. Their dense core, combined with tremendous velocity and kinetic energy, lets them shred through even tough plating. The armor-piercing rounds fired by Tony's Mark 17 were exceptionally potent, a high-density alloy Tony had developed himself, propelled by the Mark 17's powerful launchers. They tore into the aberrant race lizard's armor. Although the creature's reflexes and warning instincts let it avoid some shots, it still took several hits. These rounds traveled faster than the speed of sound. That the lizard evaded most of them already showed how acute its early warning senses were. When the rounds passed through the armor and into the beast's body, they struck dense muscle and bone and lost the velocity needed to exit the far side. That outcome was exactly what Tony had planned. The rounds were high-explosive armor-piercing shells with delayed fuses. They penetrated, then detonated inside the target. A muffled series of explosions tore through the aberrant race lizard's torso. The creature screamed, this time a howl full of agony as ordnance buried in its flesh detonated one after another. Hovering above, Tony pumped his fist in triumph. "Yes! Let's see you die! Sir, be careful," Jarvis warned in his ear. Before Tony could savor the victory, the lizard's reaction defied his expectations. The internal blasts had badly damaged its muscles and organs, injuries that would be fatal to most Earth creatures. But deviants were different. Their vitality was tenacious. The shots hadn't torn the creature apart. It was wounded, but still moving, and the pain only made it angrier. As it roared, its pupils, normally pitch black, abruptly went dark green. The change was almost instantaneous. Tony, distracted and airborne, missed the subtle shift. Jarvis did not. "What?" Tony began to ask Jarvis, but he never got the question out. The aberrant race lizard counterattacked. The dark green in its eyes wasn't energy, it was blood. Congealed, pressurized blood had pooled in the corners of the lizard's eyes. A tiny fissure opened at one corner, and the trapped fluid erupted like a high-pressure water jet. The green blood projectile shot toward Tony in a straight, lethal line. Tony was human, and his reflexes couldn't match a machine or a deviant. Jarvis took temporary control of the Mark 17, trying to steer the suit out of the attack. This fight had become almost turn-based. The lizard hadn't dodged all of Tony's armor-piercing rounds, and Tony couldn't avoid the lizard's unexpected bloodshot. As the blood arrow closed in, the jet widened into a spray, covering a larger area. Even with Jarvis at the controls, the suit couldn't fully evade. The corrosive green blood struck the left half of the Mark 17. The armor on the left arm and leg was drenched. The chest and waist were splashed less heavily. Shit! Tony finally snapped into action, firing thrusters to pull away from the creature. But it was too late. The blood was highly corrosive. Wherever it touched the Mark 17, the metal sizzled and smoke poured off it. Tony's suit had some vibranium mixed in during construction, but most of the vibranium was concentrated around the arc reactor in the chest. Small amounts reinforced critical areas like the chest plate and helmet. The limb armor had only traces, and the thruster assemblies, especially those on the left side, had none. The left side thruster failed under the corrosive attack and flamed out. With asymmetric thrust, the Mark 17 spun out of control. The remaining engines couldn't keep it stable. Tony plummeted, a blue streak falling toward a sand dune. Bang! The Mark 17 slammed into the sand, gouging a small crater. "Sir, are you all right?" Jarvis asked, concern infusing his synthetic voice. Tony reflexively checked the telemetry on his heads-up display and regained his balance. "I'm fine," he said, scanning the suit diagnostics. After a beat, Tony cut the damaged thrusters and fired the two intact engines, dragging the suit back into the sky and away from the pit. The quick ascent didn't erase the shock. The sky wasn't as safe as he'd thought. On his HUD, the armor sections splashed with green blood flashed red, critical damage warnings, and on the display, he could see the corrosive reaction continuing to eat at the left side plating. Jarvis kept trying to stabilize systems and patch power routing, but the corrosive substance was already compromising more than just mobility. Tony's grin vanished. The fight hadn't gone as planned, and the aberrant race lizard was still very much dangerous. Chapter 408, Tony Strikes Back. Jarvis, any suggestions? Tony raised his hand and saw the green blood slicking his gauntlet. The alloy was still smoking where the corrosive fluid had eaten through the coating. Its potency clearly exceeded any acid Tony had seen on Earth. "The anti-corrosion coating has failed, sir. I suggest using the suit's cryospray to treat the corrosive residue," Jarvis answered crisply. "Cryospray? Right." Tony blinked. He'd installed that function, and for once, it was coming in handy. The aberrant race lizard was charging again. After the last hit, Tony didn't trust flying to be safe. While speaking to Jarvis, he fought to balance on a single leg thruster, his right hand already raised to fire a repulsor beam. He'd practiced single thruster balance a long time ago. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Along with the repulsor, he launched the remaining mini-missiles from the suit. The repulsor missed. The lizard, though badly wounded, was still fast enough to dodge. The miniature missiles, however, struck in numbers. They weren't armor-piercing rounds like before, and the beast's thick scales absorbed most of the explosions. Still, the barrage forced it to stop its charge, exactly the delay Tony needed. He extended his right hand over the corroded section. Tiny nozzles opened in the armored fingers, and a white cryogenic spray hissed out, covering the green blood. The fluid froze almost instantly, congealing from viscous goo to brittle solid. Because the stuff was tacky even when frozen, it didn't fall off, but the smoking stopped. Jarvis had also mixed neutralizers into the spray. They began to break down the acid, slowing the corrosion. The frozen residue darkened to a dingy green, another ugly blot on Tony's armor. He glared at it. "Great, it looks like shit," Tony muttered, then looked up at the giant below. The lizard charged again, and its dark pupils flashed green. "Sir," Jarvis warned. I know! Tony snapped. Seeing the eye color change clicked into place. Green eyes preceded a blood spray attack. With his propulsion compromised, he couldn't dodge it in the usual way. He made a quick decision. As the lizard erupted another spray, Tony cut thrust from the lone leg thruster and jammed the hand thrusters to full. Gravity and the hand thrusts pulled him into a rapid descent, letting the spray pass over where he had been. Just before hitting the sand, he refired the foot thrusters to bleed off speed and executed a textbook landing, armor settling solidly on the ground. What's with this thing? Spraying from its eyes now? What is it, Superman's lizard? Tony grumbled out loud. He'd scanned there earlier. These beasts look like lion mane lizards back on Earth, but those didn't shoot blood. Spraying from the eyes or the corners of the eyes is similar to the behavior of horned lizards, Jarvis noted. Right, fantastic. Whatever lizard you are, you picked the wrong suit to piss off. Tony stood, eyes fixed on the colossal creature advancing toward him. Up close, it was still oppressive, terrifying in scale. Jarvis, assist in close quarters combat, he said, forcing his voice steady. Yes, sir. The Mark 17, Heartbreaker, was taller and more heavily armored than his flight suits, designed for close combat. Tony wanted to test it, to see how it stacked up against the destroyer armor he'd once wielded. The destroyer had always felt alien. Even after melting it down and forging its power into another shell, he still built suits he could call his own. The heavy suit began to move. Using short bursts from the thrusters, Tony skated across the sand with surprising agility. The lizard, now badly injured, abandoned another spray attack. It was too weakened to waste blood that way, and instead lunged with its great maw. Tony dodged the vicious pounce with a sharp sidestep, thrusters firing for lateral movement. The beast's recovery left it exposed, and Tony surged in, closing on the neck. Chapter 409, The Incredible Hulk. Hulk, an angry roar echoed across the sandy wasteland. Hulk fought his way out of a mound of sand, his face twisted with fury. A vicious whip from the aberrant race lizard's tail had slammed him through the air for hundreds of meters before he slammed into the dunes and was buried under thick layers of sand. He shoved the grit off his body and hauled himself back up to the surface. That tail strike had shattered several ribs on his side and hurled him like a projectile, proof of the lizard's enormous size and force. From the outside, though, Hulk's chest showed no obvious deformity. Whatever fractures there were, they were relatively minor. It only underscored the beast's power. A tail like that could have sent even a multi-ton vehicle flying. The aberrant race lizard was already charging toward him from not far away. Seeing it renewed Hulk's rage into a boiling eruption. His body shifted again. Muscles swelled, veins stood out like cords, his breath came in thunderous heaves. His arms bulged into living mountains, his chest rose and fell like a bellows, and his legs thickened into twin trunks to bear the mass. The only thing unchanged were the elastic shorts clinging to his hips. No matter how big he became, those shorts held fast, a ridiculous but reliable constant. As his fury took hold, the wounds torn by the lizard's teeth and the ribs cracked by its tail knit together. Hulk expanded wildly, surging to roughly 3 meters tall, nearly even with the lizard's shoulders. He bellowed and crouched, coiled power gathering in his limbs, then launched. The sand exploded beneath his feet as he leapt, the ground collapsing into a massive crater while grit streamed backward like a hail of blades. Hulk crossed the gap with the speed of a green cannonball and slammed into the aberrant race lizard before it could recover. His fists, poised like 2 small mountains, came down with devastating force on the beast's armored hide. The impact set the sand trembling. A curtain of dust and debris roared up into a brief sandstorm. The lizard shrieked and was flipped end over end, tumbling backwards several times before slamming into the dunes and kicking up a huge plume of sand. Hulk didn't let up. He pounced again, unleashing a torrent of blows. The lizard flailed in panic, claws raking the air and sending cold glints through the dust. Its tail lashed the ground like a steel whip, each strike collapsing nearby dunes. But Hulk met it head-on, grappling the beast. Sharp talons tore into his green flesh, leaving deep gashes. Dark green blood spouted and streaked down his skin, mingling with sand until his body looked streaked and savage. It didn't slow him. Hulk roared and hammered the lizard with brutal, repeated strikes. Scales cracked apart under the onslaught, flesh split and green blood sprayed with every blow. The blood was corrosive. When it splashed onto his hands, it began to eat through the skin, exposing white bone beneath. But the rage that controlled Hulk paid it no heed. The fury of the fight consumed him. Even as his knuckles were burned away, he kept swinging like a wrecking ball. The lizard's morale crumbled. Its claws no longer had effect. The scratches closed almost as fast as they were made. A spurt of green blood from its eyes was blocked by Hulk's massive palm. Then that same palm slammed into the lizard's maw, shattering its teeth into fragments that scattered through the sand. No matter how wildly it thrashed, Hulk pinned it down. From a distance, the scene looked absurd and terrifying. A 3-meter green titan holding down an 8-meter aberrant lizard on the dunes, the disparity making the spectacle almost surreal. Finally, the lizard, sensing imminent death as Hulk's fist readied to smash into its chest, summoned a last reserve of strength and heaved. With a ferocious heave, it flipped Hulk away. Dust exploded into the air, briefly obscuring both combatants. When the grit settled, the lizard lay in a pitiful state, its mouth stripped of intact teeth, chest scales shattered, flesh a bloody ruin, and its 2 forelimbs twisted as if broken. Terrified and broken, the aberrant race lizard staggered to its feet and limped blindly away, retreating in the only direction it could imagine might save it. It hadn't gone more than a few frantic steps when a thick iron grip seized its tail. A thick, broad palm closed around the aberrant race lizard's equally thick tail. The green fingers could not fully encircle it, but like iron clamps they held on, crushing the cruel scaled hide until the armored plates began to splinter. The lizard, already panicked, felt its tail seized and lashed out in a frenzy. All 4 legs flailed, its 2 bent forelimbs twisted awkwardly. It clawed at the sand in a desperate bid for purchase, leaving 4 deep gouges beneath it, but its bulk would not move, as if clamped in a pair of iron tongues. For a moment, the lizard seemed to wish it could shed its tail, but it had not evolved that escape. If it survived this time, perhaps future deviants would. Survival was the prerequisite for evolution, and Hulk had no intention of granting it either. A massive green arm rose from the ground, muscles like knotted hills, every line straining with power. Hulk bared his teeth in a bloody, feral grin and seized the tail with his other hand. The joints in his fingers tightened, the tail's scales shattered, and the bones within creaked under the pressure. The lizard howled in agony, twisted its torso and tried to fight back, but Hulk only tightened his grip and flung it. The creature sailed in a perfect arc and slammed into the sand with a thunderous impact, sending grit and stone flying and gouging out a crater. Hulk didn't pause. He swung again in the opposite direction and smashed the lizard back to the ground. Time after time, bang after bang, he launched it into the air and pulverized it into the earth. Around them, the loose sand compacted under the blows until it was harder than pavement. After at least 2 of what someone might later call Loki slams, he finally stopped. Where the great beast had stood was now a sodden ruin of flesh and bone. The lizard lay collapsed like a deflated sack. Its ribs were caved in, its innards a tangled ruin, and the wound on its chest that Hulk had opened now oozed a dark, unknown fluid. The once majestic creature was dead. Hulk's frenzy ebbed. He had been inside Banner far longer than was healthy, and the sudden chance to become himself again had been intoxicating, especially with a huge, convenient target right in front of him. His height had shot up from roughly 2.5 meters to about 3.5 meters, and his bulk was more terrifying than ever. He knew, in that primitive way he could, that this state would not last forever. After he calmed, Banner would resurface, and the body would shrink back. Even while breathing hard, his wounds began to knit. The hand that had been corroded to the bone by acidic blood was filling in with green flesh again. Hulk scanned the area. He remembered there had been more than one of those big lizards. As he turned, something flew in from a distance. He almost leapt to swat it away, but the thing didn't come for him. It landed at his feet. Iron Man lay sprawled on the sand, limbs akimbo, his armor scorched and dented. The suit was tattered beyond the sections whose seals had been eaten by acid. Other panels were buckled or caved in. Tony Stark scrambled up to a sitting position, rattled but grinning through the grime. "Hey, Hulk," he managed, waving a hand. Hulk didn't answer with words. He snorted, a heavy, contemptuous sound. Since Banner's presence had started to accept Hulk again, the Green Man's awareness had sharpened. He didn't understand the metal shell or the articulate voice, but something inside him recognized the iron as an ally, and he did not strike. Tony took in the ruined, aberrant race lizard and realized, with a new, sober shock, how monstrous the creature Banner had become actually was. Hulk looked bigger than the last time Tony had seen him, too, bigger than he remembered. He hesitated, then pinged Jarvis for a check. "Yes, sir," Jarvis replied. "The entity codenamed Hulk shows a significant increase in size compared to initial records. Estimated height increase, approximately 1.34 meters. However, sir, this is not the optimal time to focus on that," Jarvis warned, and a red blip lit up on Tony's faceplate, an enemy signature closing in fast. "Oh, right, that stinky lizard," Tony said, remembering. He pushed himself to his feet and looked toward the bearing the HUD indicated. Another aberrant race lizard was racing toward them. This one looked much more intact than the first, its scales whole, its limbs functional, coming in fast and angry. Chapter 411, Exploded. Tony's attention snapped back to the battlefield after Jarvis reminded him that the aberrant race lizard that had sent him flying was closing in. He straightened up and dropped into a combat stance. He'd already put serious wounds into the creature with armor-piercing rounds, but its unexpected blood spray attack had damaged his suit's power systems and crippled his aerial mobility. He couldn't risk another dose of that highly corrosive acid, so he elected to come down and fight it on the ground. He trusted the armor. The Mark 17 Heartbreaker was built more for combat than his old Mark line. Thicker plating, heavier firepower. That confidence lasted until he actually traded blows with a deviant. The lizard's raw strength made Tony work for every move. Each hit landed like a freight train. By a rough Earth-scale estimate, Tony figured the beast would weigh at least 7 or 8 tons. For an alien deviant, that was probably conservative. Every swing of a creature that size carried terrifying force. If it weren't for the vibranium woven into his armor to absorb kinetic energy, he was certain the repeated impact would have done severe internal damage. After a few exchanges, it was obvious he couldn't win a slugging match. He regretted not fitting a melee weapon module. He was left mostly with his fists. Against human scum, an iron fist was enough. Against thick hides and armored scales, not so much. Repulsors and cutting beams did better. Tony wasn't a brawler by nature anyway. He'd been doing close combat training in the destroyer suit, but this wasn't the destroyer. The Heartbreaker's real ace was its chest cannon, protected by heavy plating. He changed tactics accordingly. After narrowly dodging a flurry of claw swipes, he found a sliver of time to charge the chest beam. Bright energy started to coalesce over the arc reactor. Even at the beginning of the charge, the output was higher than the beam cannons on his previous suits. But not high enough. He kept pushing the conversion, letting the vibranium framework in his chest take more and more. The lizard, however, reacted fast. From the first moment he began to charge to the beast's pounce, less than 2 seconds had passed. Nowhere near enough for a full buildup. It lunged. Tony had no choice but to fire prematurely. The beam was still ramping when the creature noticed the increasing light and seemed to understand what was happening. Mid-air, the lizard twisted its enormous body and lashed its 4-meter tail straight at his chest, the exact spot where the energy was converging. Tony watched the shadow of that tail grow over him. The charge detonated on impact. The chest cannon didn't fire outward, it blew up against the lizard's tail on Tony's armor. A blinding flash and a concussive shockwave erupted. The blast combined with the brute force of the tail strike and threw him clear. That was why he'd suddenly landed beside the Hulk earlier. Miraculously, he wasn't shredded. The vibranium chest plate had absorbed most of the shock and kept him from being fatally hurt. The thought of what might have happened without that plate chilled him. He made a mental note to talk to Noah about sourcing more vibranium and to optimize the arc reactor's energy conversion when this was all over. For now, there was no time for upgrades. He focused on the immediate fight and noticed one small advantage. The explosion hadn't left the lizard unscathed. Its once proud tail lay mutilated, a bloody stump where the massive limb had been blown apart. Chapter 412. Blast, the aberrant race lizard that had once stretched over 8 meters, was now barely over 6. The rest of its tail had been blown away by the cluster bomb Tony had set off earlier. Tony allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. His weapon had worked. Roar, Hulk bellowed as another lizard lunged into view and he pounced. Nice, Hulk. Buy me some time, Tony shouted, elated. With Hulk holding the deviant in place, he could charge the chest cannon. Jarvis, he barked. Yes, sir. Initiating cluster cannon sequence, preparing to fire, came the calm reply inside his helmet. The arc reactor on his chest flared as energy converged. The four strap-like plates on his armor shifted outward, making room for the weapon about to deploy. Tony spread his arms slightly and dropped into a wide stance to brace for recoil. Hulk had already slammed into the aberrant race lizard, grappling it and rolling backward. They tumbled across the desert like a threshed bundle until they came to a stop, Hulk on top, the lizard beneath him. Hulk pinned the creature's front limbs beneath his feet and began hammering it with massive fists. The lizard thrashed, but it was badly injured from its earlier wounds and couldn't break free. Unlike the last deviant Hulk had fought, this one didn't try to flee. It was driven by a single blind fury, focused on tearing apart the cause of its pain. The lizard's chin, ringed with sharp, mane-like spines, swelled and then shot those spines like a sudden hail toward Hulk. Needles of bone peppered Hulk's arms and face. He raised his hands to shield his head, and the spines pinged against his thick skin, some ricocheted, some embedded. Hulk barely registered the pain. If anything, it fed his rage, making him stronger. A shout from Tony broke through the chaos. Banner, get out of the way! Hulk reflexively glanced toward Tony. Lightning-like energy was crackling from Tony's chest unit. Even the Hulk could feel the danger. Not stupid, just enraged, Hulk did exactly what Tony wanted. He unclenched enough to grab the lizard's belly and a foreleg, heaved with everything he had, and flung the creature up into the air toward Tony. Good, moving targets are my specialty, Tony crowed. I've got a target lock. A moving target's nothing. A high-pitched buzzing filled his helmet as the aiming reticle automated and locked. The cluster cannon mounted in his chest began to build a scream of power. Then a blinding beam tore out of the muzzle, cutting the air and striking the aberrant race lizard mid-flight. The recoil dragged Tony's boots across the sand, scoring 2 short furrows, but he planted his core and didn't lose his aim. The lizard flailed in the sky. Without its tail, it couldn't right itself, and the beam hit true. Scorching energy met scale and flesh. Any part the beam touched was vaporized. The shot didn't produce the spectacular explosion Tony had imagined. The lizard's tissues simply couldn't hold the energy. The beam sliced through the creature as if it were tofu and kept going into the sky with unabated force. The severed carcass dropped like a kite with a broken string and hit the sand. Finally, Tony let out, standing back up from his braced posture. The arc reactor on his chest hissed and gave off a thin wisp of white smoke, then calmed. He checked his HUD. The charge had taken a lot. Suit power was down to just over 20%. Hulk landed beside the fallen lizard and inspected the body. A massive, blackened hole gaped in its chest where the beam had passed, right through where its heart should be. The edges of the wound were charred, and the stench of burnt flesh hung in the air. The lizard's head was twisted aside, mouth agape, tongue limp, its once fierce eyes now glassy and fixed on the sky. Hulk nodded once in grim satisfaction, then plucked the spines from his arms one by one and tossed them onto the carcass. Tony crouched beside the corpse and confirmed what he already suspected. The chest cannon had done the job. It had been enormously potent and enormously costly. A low rumble rolled across the desert at that moment. Tony and Hulk looked up just in time to see a fork of yellow lightning tear down from the storm-dark sky. Chapter 413, Real or Fake Thor? Real or Fake Banner? A clap of thunder rolled across the desert, drawing Tony and the Hulk's attention as they stood beside the gutted carcass of an aberrant race lizard. Tony caught a flash of yellow lightning streaking down out of nowhere, but there were no dark clouds in the sky. Where did that thunder come from? He thought of Noah. Noah was fighting a lizard too. Could the lightning have come from him? Tony remembered Noah showing signs of electrical powers. Banner, or Hulk, do you want to go check it out with me? Tony glanced toward the sound, but a large sand dune blocked their view. Tony started to call Banner's name out of habit, but the first syllable barely left his mouth when he noticed the Hulk's slight snarl. He changed tack immediately. Hulk hated being called Banner. Banner had been the one living with the Hulk for years, but Banner resented the Hulk's existence. The Hulk's personality was blunt, direct, almost childlike, and because Banner had always disliked him, the Hulk never felt any affection for Banner either. Banner might be warming up lately, but Hulk hadn't fully forgiven him. Tony adjusted his words, and Hulk shut his mouth. After a quick look at Tony, the big green form bent his knees and launched himself toward the thunder. His leap cleared the dune in one powerful bound, and he vanished from Tony's sight. Sand and gravel snapped against Tony's armor as Hulk cleared the crest. Tsk! I still prefer Banner, Tony muttered, patting the dented plating. He fired up the 2 remaining thrusters on his suit and took off after Hulk. With only 2 engines, the flight was wobbly, but speed was speed. Soon he was over the dune and landing somewhat unsteadily beside Hulk. Ahead of them, Tony saw a scene that made his brow furrow. Thor, the Thor he remembered, stood with Mjolnir in hand in front of a smoking, charred lizard corpse. Yellow lightning danced over Thor's body, straying to strike the dead beast now and then. The carcass still smoldered. "Hey, Thor," Tony called. A blue flash appeared behind them, and Noah materialized, reaching up to slap Tony on the shoulder. "Noah," Tony turned. "Why are you here? And why is Thor here? How did he know where we were? If Thor had come down from Asgard today, why wasn't he off looking for his girlfriend? How did he know their location?" Tony unloaded questions on Noah, who watched the doppelganger with an amused expression. Hulk just scanned the empty flats of the desert, uncertain what to do next. Thor seemed to notice them and flew over, but Tony immediately picked up something odd. Thor wasn't spinning his hammer. In Tony's experience, Thor spinning Mjolnir was the Asgardian equivalent of a personal helicopter. He'd always found it entertaining and a little ridiculous that a god needed a prop to fly. Thor's failure to spin the hammer now struck Tony as strange, almost wrong. Thor didn't think there was anything strange about it. In Asgard, Tony imagined gods didn't generally fly without tools. Tony pictured Thor's peers doing whatever the Asgardian equivalent of walking on air was. Still, the Thor in front of them landed and stared. "Hey, Thor, why did you come?" Tony called again. Noah's eyes twinkled. "Tony, he's not Thor," Noah said quietly from behind Tony. "Not Thor?" Tony turned back toward the thunder god, puzzled. The man before them began to shift. His armor rippled, and his features slid like clay into a new shape. The transformation startled Hulk so badly he took a step back, baring yellowed teeth. "Huh?" Tony said, surprised, and swung his gaze forward. The Thor who'd been standing there a breath ago was gone. In his place was Banner, Bruce Banner, standing sheepish and confused, looking exactly like the man Tony knew from the lab. "What?" Tony blinked. He glanced at Hulk to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks. Hulk was still there, huge and verdant and real. Who was the man in front of him? "Who are you?" Tony snapped, raising his palm cannon toward the newcomer. "Tony, what are you doing?" "I'm Banner," the man said, bewildered. He sounded honest, genuinely confused. "No, you were Thor just a second ago. How did you turn into Banner?" Tony barked. Jarvis had already started playing a recording in a corner of Tony's faceplate, looping the moment the Thor form had shifted into Banner the instant Tony looked away. The footage was incriminating, a seamless, instantaneous transformation, impossible to miss. That's why Tony was on edge. He had no idea what a shapeshifter was doing here in the middle of the desert, or what its purpose might be. Noah had already told him this creature wasn't Thor. But if not Thor, who? And how had it slipped in and mimicked first a god and then a genius? Tony's finger tightened on the trigger as he tried to absorb it all. "Who are you?" Tony demanded, eyes locked on the man pretending to be Banner. Hulk snarled beside him, startled to see Banner suddenly standing there. It was the first time the two halves had come face to face like this. Since they shared one body, they rarely had the chance to confront each other directly. "I am Banner?" the imposter said, looking genuinely puzzled, then slowly took off his glasses. Tony leveled his arm at him. The repulsor in his palm hummed faintly, ready to fire. "You're Banner? Then who's this?" he asked, glancing at the real Hulk. Hulk, furious at the sight of a fake version of himself, stepped forward with clenched fists, ready to smash him. The imposter smiled and said, "See? I can turn into the Hulk too." As he took off his glasses, his body swelled, his clothes ripped across the chest, and his skin flushed green, every bit the same transformation Banner went through. Tony stared, dumbfounded. Even Hulk, who'd just been about to lunge, froze at the sight. A Hulk, indistinguishable from theirs, now stood where the imposter had been. "What the hell?" Tony muttered. He'd seen the imposter mimic Thor earlier, summoning yellow lightning. Had the man been copying powers as well as appearances? Tony edged closer to Noah behind him, staying vigilant. "Noah, what's going on? What is he? An alien?" Tony asked. Hulk, seeing his double, let out a roar and swung at him. The fake Hulk blocked the punch easily, then used the momentum to throw Hulk clean over his shoulder. Tony cursed. "He's got Hulk's strength? He can mimic our powers." Hulk hit the sand, rubbed his head, and spit grit out of his mouth. He scrambled up, furious, and charged again. "Noah, don't," Tony warned, but Hulk ignored him. At that moment, Noah, standing behind them, gave a small smile and snapped his fingers. Blue light flickered where his fingertips met, and in an instant the fake Hulk vanished from his position. He reappeared beside Noah and began shrinking back into the man Tony had seen moments before. A joke? Tony raised an eyebrow. He looked between the now normal man and Noah. Did Noah know him? Hulk's tackle missed by inches. He popped back up, bewildered, and charged again. This time, blue light flashed around him as he neared. His whole body blinked out and then reappeared where he'd just been standing, over and over, so that every time he lunged, he ended up right where he started. After repeating it a few times, he finally realized he'd been running in place. "This is my clone," Noah said. "I was just teasing you guys." "A clone?" Tony's eyes shifted from the looping Hulk back to Noah. "You can make clones? And they can copy other people's appearances and voices?" "Yes," the clone answered, now in Banner's form, and then it transformed into Tony's face, speaking in Tony's voice perfectly. Tony felt a chill. Looking at a living copy of himself was like staring into a mirror. If Noah could also read memories, if his Mind Stone allowed that, he could, in theory, replace someone completely. But if anyone would be responsible with that power, it was Noah. Tony trusted him enough to assume he wouldn't abuse it. "Okay, Noah, don't turn into me again. It's creepy," Tony said after a few seconds, unsettled despite the handsome face. Noah shrugged, and the clone dissolved into white mist. The looping space he'd used to trap Hulk winked out as well. The more Noah worked with the Space Stone, the more skilled he became. Tricks that had once only existed in his imagination were becoming practical, creating pocketed, looping areas of space included. Tony felt the unease leave him once the double was gone. Noah had been bored, too bored maybe to resist teasing them, but also efficient. One clone and those aberrant lizards were dealt with easily. "All right, the lizards are handled," Tony said, nodding toward the scattered, defeated creatures. "But what about him? Noah, can you get Banner back?" He pointed at the real Hulk, who was still grinding sand from his fists and glaring at his imitator. Chapter 4 and 15, Sound of Silence. "Noah, what do we do with him?" Tony asked, nodding toward the Hulk. He'd been silently grumbling about Noah's joke, then noticed Hulk standing there. "Can you turn him back into Banner?" Hulk had calmed somewhat after realizing the illusion of himself had disappeared. He was scanning the area now, looking uncertain. This was the first time Tony had seen Banner become the Hulk up close. He didn't know how the transformation reversed itself. Watching Hulk's movements and expression, Tony got the uneasy impression the big green guy intended to leave the desert on his own. So he asked Noah for a plan. "No problem," Noah replied. He had several options. He could repeat the old trick, send a jolt of electricity through Hulk to restore Banner's consciousness. He could call Betty and have her talk Hulk down, the method Banner himself had mentioned. Or he could use the simplest, Michael's blessing, the little golden bell. A shake of that would calm the rage and bring Banner back. Noah didn't want to electrocute Hulk. That felt too risky. Calling Betty was doable, but inconvenient. He briefly considered using his 2 lives shadow clone to impersonate her, but the idea of cross-dressing gave him an immediate chill. So he reached into his system backpack and pulled out the bell. The golden bell appeared in his hand and swayed gently, producing a clear, distant chime. The sound hung in the empty desert, mysterious and soothing. Sunlight flashed off the bell, and golden highlights danced along its surface. "This is," Tony murmured as the tone reached him. The sound settled over him like a warm hand. His tension from the fight drained away, his mind unclenched. Even without Noah calling on whatever power the bell held, its simple chime had a centering effect. Noah shook it again, infusing a little magic into the note. The ringing seemed to solidify, a wave of golden light rippling outward. Tony, standing beside him, felt his thoughts dissolve for a moment. The sound blanked his mind. Hulk, not far off, was hit by that same wave. He recognized the sound. It had comforted him before. He didn't resist. The wild anger that had overtaken him unraveled under the bell's influence. A peaceful expression crept across his massive face, not the sinister Hulk grin, but something calm. He laid down slowly, as if finally succumbing to sleep. His bulk diminished, muscles relaxing, green fading to normal skin, until Banner lay on the sand. A snap of fingers in front of Tony's face brought him back from the daze. "No daydreaming, Stark," Noah said, grinning as he snapped. "You're losing your edge." "Oh, right." Tony blinked and followed his gaze. Banner was there, shirtless and bewildered, stirring on the sand. He pushed himself up, rubbing his head, clearly confused about his surroundings. Tony walked over with Noah. "That bell, what is it? Do you sell them? I want one." "No," Noah said. "There's only one like it. It's a system artifact, unique in the whole universe. Maybe someday I could get you one if the conditions ever allow, but not now." Tony's face fell, but he quickly masked it with a shrug. If Noah wouldn't sell, he could try to build something similar. He suspected, though, that replicating a system artifact's effect would be a tall order. Banner finally stood, looking around at the endless sand. He had no shirt, just a pair of elastic shorts, and his hair was messy. He blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. Chapter 416, Recovering the Body. Where am I?" Banner muttered, still dizzy after reverting from Hulk to human. He blinked against the bright desert sun and glanced at the sand beneath his feet. For a moment he was disoriented, then memories flooded back. The detector, the satellite, the aberrant race lizard, the Hulk. The events replayed in his head until it all snapped into place. "Oh, right." He straightened, pulled his pants up, and walked toward Tony and Noah. "How are things? Is everything taken care of?" His recollection of what happened while he was the Hulk was fuzzy, so he asked them directly. "Hey, Banner, you're back," Tony said, coming up and clapping him on the shoulder. Banner's eyes landed on Tony's armor. Half of it was coated with a black, crusted substance. "Tony, why does your suit look like that? Was the fight rough?" Tony gave an awkward smile. No big deal. I just got ambushed by that lizard." The hardened, acidic blood of the aberrant race lizard had stuck to his armor. He wasn't cleaning it off. He wanted to take samples back to his lab. The corrosive properties intrigued him. When he'd designed the suit, he'd accounted for acids and added an anti-acid coating, but this stuff from off-world was far stronger than anything on Earth and rendered his coating useless. He made a mental note to study it and develop better countermeasures. "All those big lizards, are they all dead?" Banner asked. "Yeah, all handled," Tony answered, conveniently leaving out the part about how the Hulk had hastened the end of the fight. "One each, like we planned." "Good. Let's get out of here. I'm roasting," Banner said, tugging at his bare chest where the sun burned. "Hot?" Tony grinned and snapped his gauntlet. A small nozzle extended and sprayed a white mist at Banner. He felt the sting of cold and shivered involuntarily. "What is that?" "Liquid nitrogen," Tony said, laughing as the mist stopped. "You said you were hot, so I cooled you down." He didn't bother explaining that while liquid nitrogen is great for instant cooling at around 990 degrees Celsius, prolonged contact can cause severe frostbite. "Don't worry, Banner. Aren't you going to take the bodies of those deviants back?" Tony asked after retracting the nozzle. Banner looked to Noah. Noah was the leader here. Banner figured it was better for him to decide. Yeah, bring them back," Noah said. The bodies of alien creatures were invaluable to scientists. There was a lot to study. "All right, I'll fly over and grab them," Tony said, and started powering his single thruster to head toward where the bodies lay. "Wait, Tony. No need to go over there." Before Tony could lift off, Noah closed his eyes and concentrated. A soft blue light flashed across the sand, and the three bodies that had been scattered around the battlefield materialized at their feet. They were gruesome. One was crushed so badly its bones were shattered into a sodden mess. Another had a huge hole in its chest with organs spilling out and its tail snapped off. A third was charred beyond recognition. Tony and Banner both wondered how much research value it still held. Oh, and this. Another blue flash produced a massive severed tail. Tony grabbed it, grinning and showing it off. I took this off. Banner could only give a weary, speechless Noah teleported all the nearby bodies here, he said, opening his eyes. Apart from the blood already soaked into the sand, Noah had gathered everything for them. I envy you. That power is insanely convenient, Tony said, looking around. It is, Noah agreed, but you two can't use it. The ability came from the Space Stone. Neither Tony nor Banner could safely touch or wield it. Doing so would destroy them. Even if the Hulk might be able to handle it, it wasn't something they could adopt. Tsk, don't be exclusive, Tony protested. Next time you go to that Camartage place, you have to take me. Maybe I can learn it. Camartage? That ancient institution that does magic? Can I come too? Banner asked, curious. If I have time, I'll take you both, Noah said. He was curious too, whether they could learn those techniques, but he suspected it would be difficult, if not impossible. Convincing two top scientists that spinning a ring could open a portal was hard enough. Even Stephen Strange had resisted until the Ancient One forced him to accept the truth. Chapter 417, Back to the Lab. Hiss, whoosh, finally back. After the battle, Noah and the others returned to the underground laboratory with the corpses of the deviants. As soon as Tony stepped through the teleportation gate, he ripped off his Iron Man suit as if escaping a metal cage. He drew in the cool, clean air of the lab, and a look of relief washed over him. Inside the suit, it had felt terribly stuffy, unbearable, and the slightly chilled atmosphere here felt like gulping a glass of ice water on a sweltering day. The suit's automatic temperature control had been malfunctioning again. When Tony first arrived in the desert, that system had acted up, but it was minor, and he'd managed to reboot it. During the fight, though, the armor took serious damage. Acidic venom had eaten at components and knocked systems offline, and the temperature regulator was one of the casualties. With adrenaline spiking during the battle, Tony hadn't paid much attention, but once it ended, he'd noticed the heat building inside the suit. Now he could finally get out and cool off. Noah, where's Banner? Didn't he come through with us? Tony wiped sweat from his brow and realized only he and Noah had exited the gate. The deviants' bodies were gone too. Noah watched the blue teleportation gate vanish behind him and explained, Banner's upstairs getting dressed. His exit point isn't the same as ours, and I sent the deviant corpses to the warehouse. Since getting the Space Stone, Noah's control over space had become precise. Sending bodies to a storage area and choosing where people reappeared was nothing to him. Upstairs, Tony glanced up at the silvery white ceiling, feeling another wave of sticky sweat. Forget it. I'm going to shower, completely drenched. Tony had meant to invite Noah, but seeing Noah perfectly dry and composed, he changed his mind. Noah nodded. I'll send you up. Before Tony could ask what that meant, Noah pointed, and in a flicker of blue light, Tony vanished. He reappeared in the resort above the lab, standing in Banner's room. Banner, in the middle of putting on a shirt, finally noticed him and yelped. Oh shit! Banner jumped back. Tony, how did you get in? Why didn't you make any sound? Tony waved it off. Ask Noah. I need a shower. Is there a bathroom here? Banner pointed. Outside the door. Turn left, go straight, it's on your right. Thanks. Tony started for the door, then poked his head back in a moment later. Hey, Banner, got any spare clothes? A shirt and shorts, unworn if possible. I'll buy you more when I get back. Banner laughed and went to the wardrobe. The clothes hung neatly on hangers. Unworn? Yeah, give me a sec. He rifled to the back and pulled out a dark shirt and a pair of long pants, then tossed them toward Tony. Here. Don't worry about returning them. Tony took the clothes and glanced at Banner's well-stocked wardrobe. You've got a lot of clothes. Where'd they all come from? Robots downstairs made them for me. I had them make a few extra sets. Banner shrugged. He didn't care much about fashion. When the robots were sewing his first sets, he just asked for extras, and now his wardrobe was full. Got it. I'll be quick. Tony headed for the bathroom to rinse off. Banner finished dressing and made his way back down to the underground laboratory. Chapter 418, Meet the Eternals. When Tony returned to the underground lab, clean from his shower, the first thing he saw was Noah and Banner standing in front of the scanner, studying the display. His eyes swept the room. The spot where he'd taken off the Iron Man suit was empty, but a few steps later he found it. The damaged armor set aside neatly in a spacious corner. Seeing the suit up close made him realize just how brutal the fight had been. He could worry about repairs later and walked over to join them. His footsteps echoed through the quiet lab. "Tony, you're back." Banner heard him and turned. Tony was in the spare clothes he'd changed into earlier and nodded. He looked around and noticed Lyssandra's absence. The four of them had been in the lab earlier: Tony, Noah, Banner, and Lysandra. But when Tony and the others were teleported to the Australian desert to intercept the deviants, Lysandra had stayed behind to work on the scanner. Now she wasn't here. "Is Lysandra around?" Tony asked. "No, she went back to New York," Noah said. "She had things to handle at the Seaside Manor lab, but she can still run the instruments remotely." They gathered in front of the scanner and watched the updated data and imagery. Lysandra must have pushed another refresh while Noah and the others were in the desert. The readings were more accurate now. Tony studied the screen, where hundreds of red dots pulsed across the map. "When I first saw only a few thousand deviants, I thought they weren't that big a deal," he admitted. "A few thousand for a species sounds like endangered level, not apocalypse level. But after the fight in Australia, seeing what even one of them can do, 3,000 of those things is a terrifying number." Noah pointed to a large red cluster up in Alaska. "These deviants are strong. If they merge with their leader, what we're calling the deviant, they can evolve and get even stronger. But I doubt the deviant can upgrade every one of the 3,000 plus. That would take massive cosmic energy." Banner and Tony both frowned. They were already hard-pressed dealing with them as things stood. If the deviants could grow stronger, how much stronger could they become? "No power-up is free," Noah went on, "and I don't think enough energy exists for them to boost thousands of units. Still, there are plenty left that need dealing with. How long until they're all cleared?" Tony rubbed his chin, eyes on the display. Noah tapped on the screen. "You don't have to worry, we'll always have to go in person. I can send the positions to the Eternals and ask them to help. That's their mission, after all. Even separated from the Celestials, they still hunt deviants. And Tony, you can suit up in the destroyer armor. If anything's tough, that should handle it. Bruce, Hulk could mop them up too, if you want to volunteer." Noah sounded confident. He believed the Eternals would jump at the chance to avenge fallen companions, and he wasn't sure he needed to lead every operation personally. With satellites and remote access, he could deploy drones and nanobots to the coordinates. Sometimes, you didn't need to open a teleport yourself to put machines on the ground. "The Eternals?" Tony's interest snapped into focus. "When can we meet them? I want to see the people who've been fighting deviants for centuries." "No hurry tonight," Noah said. "They just finished a companion's funeral. I don't want to show up while they're grieving. Tomorrow, I'll take you to meet them and brief them on the deviants." "Tomorrow's fine," Tony nodded. He planned to sort out his suit repairs in the meantime. They watched the scanner a little longer. Lyssandra's update had reduced the number of deviants listed as unmerged, those who weren't yet bonded or upgraded, so the threat was somewhat better understood, but it clearly wasn't over. The three of them stood quietly, thinking through logistics, sending coordinates to the Eternals, assigning the destroyer, scheduling Hulk deployments, and preparing remote drone swarms. Outside the display's glow, the damaged armor sat like a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Tony took one last look before heading for the workshop. Repairs, upgrades, mission planning, there was a long list. But for now, a meeting with the Eternals tomorrow offered the next step in a war that had only just begun. Chapter 419, a trip to the Amazon jungle with Banner and Tony. Smack! Ow! The sound of a palm hitting flesh echoed through the undergrowth. Dr. Bruce Banner pulled his hand away from his neck and stared at it. A large patterned mosquito lay dead in the center of his palm. His face showed thin impatience. He had no idea how many of the little bloodsuckers he'd already killed. The density of insects in this cursed place was maddening. Still, his reflexes were fast. Every time a mosquito landed, he crushed it before it could draw blood. Banner knew how dangerous even a single drop of his blood could be. One stray bite could kill a person or trigger unpredictable, disastrous mutations. The constant harassment made him feel like his anger could flip him into the Hulk at any moment. Paradoxically, that edge of barely contained rage sharpened his reactions. He struck with quick, precise slaps that kept every mosquito at bay. They were deep in the Amazon rainforest in northern South America. Beside Banner was Tony Stark in his Iron Man armor, and Noah, who was leading the way. It had been a day since they'd intercepted the deviants in the Australian desert. At the time, Noah had told them he would bring them to meet another alien presence on Earth the next day, the Eternals, who'd been wiping out the deviants. The goal of this trip was a secluded village deep in the jungle that served as a temporary residence for the Eternals. Banner rubbed his neck and glared enviously at Tony, who was safely sealed inside his suit. The armor meant Tony didn't have to worry about mosquitoes. Noah, though dressed in ordinary clothes, seemed untouched by the insects. Bugs avoided him, as if repelled by something inherent in his being. He walked through the jungle without flinching. Only a minute had passed since they'd teleported in, but every second felt long to Banner. "Noah, how much farther? These mosquitoes are driving me crazy," he finally said, edging within half a meter of him. Noah turned. Greenish veins creased Banner's neck and face, a warning that he was close to losing control. "Just ahead," Noah replied, having already sensed the village. He'd opened the teleport only a few dozen meters from their destination, but the dense trees blocked sight and sound. "Mosquitoes," Banner muttered, squashing another insect and showing the corpse. "If they suck my blood, if they digest it or bite something else, who knows what mutations could spread?" Tony glanced toward Banner, then let Jarvis continue his environmental scan. "Jarvis, any sign of human habitation nearby?" Tony asked. "Sir, based on my database of indigenous groups in the Amazon, there are no records of known tribes in this exact area. It's possible we're about to encounter an unmapped community," Jarvis replied in its calm, steady voice. Before Tony could follow up, Jarvis added, "Sir, I have detected multiple human sound sources not far away." "Just ahead?" Tony said, looking into the thick foliage. The canopy was so dense that without Jarvis he wouldn't have believed there was a village only a few dozen meters away. Tony was wearing his Mark 8 suit for the trip, an upgraded evolution of the Mark 7, with improved systems and weapons, though not as flashy as his later models. He hadn't bothered to name this suit. Tony only started naming them regularly after Mark 15. He'd considered flying up to scout, but the overhead canopy and Noah's assurance that they were close persuaded him to stay on the ground. Seeing Banner's discomfort, Noah raised a hand and wrapped him in a faint blue magic field. The shimmer settled over Banner's skin and would keep mosquitoes and other small creatures from biting him. Noah himself didn't need such a field. His skin was tough enough that insect mouthparts couldn't penetrate it, and the evolved energy within him created a natural repulsion that kept weak creatures away. Banner relaxed and smiled at the protective light. Finally, no more bites. Noah led them around an ancient tree more than 3 meters across, and the village opened up before them. "Wow, this is not what I imagined," Tony said. "Oh my God, I didn't expect a place like this," Banner added. The village had been battered in the fight with the deviants, but under the care of the Eternals and the villagers, it had been restored in just a few days to a harmonious, thriving community. The sounds of human life, voices, laughter, the bustle of daily work, rose through the jungle as they approached. Tony and Banner had already learned from Noah that the Eternals were holed up in a village deep in the Amazon. Expecting primitive jungle tribes, they pictured people in animal skins, hunting with spears and bows. Neither of them paid much attention to such things, so their assumptions were the same as anyone else's. What they actually found, however, shattered that image. The village looked like any orderly rural settlement: neatly built wooden houses, clean paths, and no clutter. Villagers wore woven fabric, clean, tidy clothes, not animal pelts. People moved about their work in a calm, organized way. It was hard to believe they were in the heart of a primitive jungle. Tony and Banner stared, surprised. Noah, too, was taking it all in, He couldn't help noticing how quickly the place had been restored, a hint that some of the Eternals had a real knack for infrastructure. A villager at the edge of the settlement caught sight of Noah and his companions and sprinted off without hesitation. He found two people chatting with smiles on their faces, a brown-skinned man and a child with blonde hair, Kingo and Sprite. The villager spoke in Portuguese, relaying what he'd seen. The Eternals had served on Earth for millennia. They knew most human tongues, so Kingo and Sprite understood him perfectly. "Someone's here? Is it one of the ones we've seen before?" Kingo asked, glancing toward the edge of the village. A wooden house blocked his view. "Probably Noah," Sprite answered. "He's the only outsider the villagers have seen recently." These people were secluded. Outsiders were rare. "Is it him? Sprite, go tell Ajak and the others. I'll go meet them," Kingo said, moving off to greet the newcomers. Sprite nodded and ran toward where Ajak and the others had gathered. After a few steps with the villager, Kingo spotted three figures approaching the village. Noah in the center, a bespectacled, scholarly-looking man at his right, and a red and gold armored figure at his left. Kingo recognized the armored figure from television. The three travelers noticed the man who looked like an Indian coming their way as well. Tony glanced over the villagers he'd scanned, mostly Caucasian, and was momentarily puzzled to see an Indian among them. The face also tugged at a vague familiarity. "Sir, I've identified him," Jarvis supplied inside Tony's helmet. "Kingo, Bollywood actor, director, and producer. He recently announced a temporary hiatus from all projects." Jarvis displayed the details on the HUD in the upper left corner. Kingo drew closer and greeted them with his hands pressed together in a namaste. "Hello, Noah, and you two." Noah returned the nod. Banner, slightly amused, mirrored the gesture. "Hello." Tony couldn't hide his surprise. "I never thought a Bollywood star would be an alien." Kingo laughed. "I'm very interested in Earth's film culture. I adopted this identity as a way to hide among humans." He gave Tony a wry look. "Iron Man, Tony Stark. I see you on TV too. You're a bigger star than I am." As they spoke, Sprite arrived back with Ajak, and in short order, the rest of the Eternals moved to the edge of the village. They came from the direction Kingo had been standing, so Noah and the newcomers saw them immediately. Tony and Banner watched the group. There was something different in their bearing and presence, and quickly realized who they were.